Good to go.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our Tech Talk today with the Tech Academy. We have one of our graduates, Kent Gray. They're going to talk about object-oriented programming with SQL. So thank you for being here and take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Hopefully you can see the presentation. I'll go ahead and get started with it. So here's the little agenda we'll go through. I'll introduce who I am, kind of give a brief overview of SQL, and then a brief overview of object-oriented programming, of just what it is conceptually, and then what that looks like when you combine the two, and then provide a use case, a real-world scenario, and hopefully have time for Q&A at the end. So my name is Kent Gray, and I currently work as a data engineer at Camelot Strategic Marketing in Dallas. And so I've got about 8 years as a data analyst, BI analyst, 6 years as a database developer, 6 years as ETL development, and then 2 years in data warehousing. So what I love, just a little bit about my loves of life. On the bottom right, you've got my family over here. That was our Halloween costume. If you're not familiar with the newest Toy Stories, we got almost all the Toy Stories in there. So I'm dressed up as Ken. My wife is Barbie. You got Buzz Lightyear, of course. Then you got Jessie on the right, and then you got Bo Peep holding her little sheep. Okay, and then other things I enjoy on the bottom left is a staple in Texas. It's called Whataburger. Love Whataburger, and that's me brainwashing my youngest, my second youngest, my son, my only son, and he's plowing into a nice burger combination there. On the top, you got me and my brother. We went to Ireland, and we went hiking quite a bit with my mom, and it's me and him enjoying a few pints at one of the local pubs. So those are many things that I love. There's kind of a career timeline. So I graduated from college in 2007, got a bachelor's in history. And then I taught tennis for about 8 years, but I also did a lot of odd jobs, selling insurance, working in oil and gas, a bunch of different things. And then September of 2015, so about a year, my daughter was about a year old at that time. I had been coaching and realized, hey, this isn't going to work. So I made a shift and moved out to Portland area for about 4 months. And I did the Tech Academy way back when. That's only when they only had one option there. Now there's so many paths that you can take there, but back then it was just pretty much like a few options back then. So from that point on, it took me about 8 months to land my first job here in Dallas. And my first role was a BI analyst. And I did a little monkey here because I felt like it was monkey work. And then I landed a job through LinkedIn at this company I stayed with for 5 years. And I was a data analyst and a database developer. Then it kind of promoted me to a kind of project manager / database developer. And then eventually became a data scientist there at the same company, though I primarily worked as a data engineer. And then I switched jobs to this company this past February. Been here for about 10 months. So why am I giving this talk? Why would you want to learn about SQL and object-oriented programming? For me, is I've got, like I mentioned, about 8 years of extraction, transforming, and loading experience. And I've just recently come into learning about this tool that does both SQL and object-oriented programming. And it's a major shift. I think it's going to be a pretty big shift in where the tech is going to head with data in the next 5-6 years. It's going to, I think, blow up. So hopefully if I expose this to you and some of you grasp this, could be a really cool tool to start learning and really get ahead of the curve a little bit, and if you want to go the data route. So SQL, and I don't know everyone's level, so I'll try to keep it, simple and not too complex. But SQL is basically just structured query language. Here you see a bunch of different kind of schema, it's tables and how they relate to each other. It is the standard for relational database management systems. So you use in databases and data warehouses. It is the language of data. If you want to go into data, you got to know it. Forgive me if this is very basic for everyone, but so it's a declarative language, and with SQL you state the result you want, and the database engine will return the results of the query. In essence, it's a collection of tables with defined relationships. So what I'll do is, just to kind of break it down, we're going to graduate from SQL into SQL plus OOP on this one case study. It's data pulled from Airbnb. It's all sample data. It's very simplified. It's very remedial, but it is a good case study. So when I say that databases are a collection of tables, it's like, say you got I don't know, Susan. She's over this department data for who are the Airbnb hosts. And I hope everyone's familiar with Airbnb. It's a online reservation company where you can stay where you want in people's houses or elsewhere throughout the United States and the world. So anyway, so this is a sample data set, obviously not very real or complex, but so let's say Susan's got this data and she's in one department, and then you've got Rick or Richard, and he's got the listings, and he manages this data. And then you've got I don't know, James, and he oversees the reviews for each of the houses or the locations. Okay, so this is what you see. The least common denominator in data for all of the world is an Excel spreadsheet. In the end, you can build out complex stuff, but everyone just wants it in a nice little Excel spreadsheet. So it comes from Excel, goes into a nice complex system. You make all these visuals, but everyone just wants it in a nice Excel spreadsheet. So how are we going to convert this into a database? It's pretty simple. We're going to take these three different data tables, basically, and we're going to give it to an ID field, a unique identifier for each row. So again, so SQL is row-based, primarily for RDBMSs, it's row-based. So I've got a unique ID for each row. I'm going to do that same thing for the listings. You can barely see it there. And then the same thing for reviews. So I've got an ID for each one. In the end, you create this schema, and you can see how they relate to each other. You've got the listings, and the ID relates to the listing ID and the reviews table, and then the listings review relates to the host and the host table. So it's got this crossover here. And what I'll do is just show briefly what that looks like. So I went ahead and I pulled all this data into a data warehouse. And then here you can see the schema here, all the data within each table. So you got the host table, the listings, and the reviews. And then here I just did a join on all three of those tables to create a very primitive SQL query, right? So now I've got all this data in one spot, right? I've got it in one big table that I can look at. Whereas in Excel, all the three, James and Rick and Susan would have to coordinate their Excel spreadsheets. They'd have to send them to each other. They'd have to update them. And there's a lot of reading and writing and, yeah, just bad stuff. So this right here, I'll just show is stored within Snowflake. This is what we use for our company. It's a data warehouse. And here's what it looked like just writing that script to pull the data. This is just loaded in from a CSV online. And there's the three different tables, right? So that's just kind of give us our premise for what we're going to do. Okay, so next I'll dive into object-oriented programming. And forgive me again, this is a very, very basic remedial breakdown. Tech Academy will give you a far better, not even comparable description of what it is. So I recommend following up with the Tech Academy on this. So object-oriented programming is what you're doing is you're just defining control structures and their actions. If anyone's studied this, you might be familiar with this little pill, right? You've got this encapsulation pill. It's a capsule, And you've got methods, you've got variables, and the whole thing is basically encapsulated within a class. So what it primarily does is it focuses on what versus how. So it's great for applications that are large, complex, and actively updated. And what is an object? An object can be anything from a computer program to a human being, a widget, or even this nice little advanced self-printing camera can be an object. The 4 principles are encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, and polymorphism. So here you can see on the left there is a breakdown, right? You've got the class of this person as a human. She has a name. That's an object. The methods that can be performed are she can verify or she can send emails. The properties that describe her would be her email or her residential address. Inheritance, that's really what I'm going to focus in on, not the other 3 as much, because that really applies to the tool that I'll be demonstrating. So inheritance is basically where a class can reuse code from other classes. It has relationships and subclasses between objects that can be assigned, enabling developers to reuse common logic while still maintaining a unique hierarchy. So the primary benefit is modularity, and that's what the combination, that's the perfect combination of SQL and object-oriented programming is what we have. So what's the problem with SQL only? So as I demonstrated here, this is our data set, right? It's pulling again. This is just connecting to my Snowflake data set. So this is a data warehouse. Snowflake is a very common tool. And briefly, I'll describe the primary difference between a database and a data warehouse is obviously it's going to have more data typically, but there's the time element. So there's this thing called a slowly changing dimension. Basically, your data will shift over time. And what a data warehouse does is it allows you to record that shift, that change in the data. So let's say you want to go back 2 years ago and see how much you sold of a single product. You have the historical changes there. You can track it. It's easier to do analytics off of that than to, whereas like a database is just like, here is what the data is at this point in time, and that's it. We're not going to record what happened 2 years ago. It's just, here's your current, unless you start to archive that data, and then you can do a time series or time analysis through that. But whereas a data warehouse, it has it all in one spot. Okay, so again, here it is, and I'm using this tool called DataGrip, and it's connected to my data warehouse. And this is the tables I created right here. These 3 raw hosts, raw listings. You can see the columns. You know, I can expand this out, right? And so I can even do this little quick thing, which is what you're seeing here. I can just generate a diagram, and that's what it looks like here on the right. But what if, let's say Susan, who has no idea, she doesn't know what SQL is.
Hey,
She knows
Ken,
Excel.
sorry to cut you off. Is it possible to actually increase the size of
Oh,
your
sorry.
screen?
Yeah. Let me see if I can do that. How do I do that? Other than you want to do a display, I can go all the way down here, change this. Let me go to
I think Ken, if you just increase the size in your browser for the Snowflake,
okay.
I wouldn't worry about it. Well, that looks good.
Okay.
But in the Chrome, if you could just magnify it a little bit, I think that would help a lot.
Okay. Definitely expand this out. Yeah, maybe I'm jumping too fast for everyone to slow me down if I need to. I'm just trying to give a high level run.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great. Just the yeah, good. Looks good.
Okay, so I've got a query here. It's not a great query, but you know, if you want, I can step this out. Like, let's say Susan, who doesn't know SQL, She wants to see everything in the raw listings table. So she's going to do something like this. Okay, but she may not even know how to do this, but let's see, she does that. It'll display the data. Oh, look at that. I left out my from. So then it's going to show me this data. Okay, but what if Susan doesn't know what fields she's looking for? Or let's say she needs to build a dashboard, or she needs to get a report really quickly to a client. How can she query the queries, basically? How can she sit there and go, I want to know, I don't know, any type of field reference? To say, in reality, most data warehouses are going to look something like what our companies look like. I'll just give you a very brief overview. It's going to be very, very complex. Okay, here's a lineage graph, and give it a refresh on it. It's going to have data all over the place. So there it was. It went away. Sorry. Well, got some delays here. My internet's not the best. Apologies, everyone. Okay. So it's once it populates, you'll see that there are thousands of queries. Okay, these are, each one of these represents a query. Okay, and they all have this complex relationship. They intertwine, and you know, they go all throughout. And so I'll refocus on this node here. So this is just one final dimension that is created, and it pulls from all of this data. But what if Susan, who has a very complex data set, and she only knows Excel, how is she going to figure out, well, I don't even know, she's not even know what to pull or what to do. So she won't have the ability to see this relationships defined, or even know where to look, because all she sees is something like this, right? Not to bash Susan, but she's just like most people, you know, and let's say marketing. They just don't have a complex understanding of data typically, right? And so this is where you're limited. You can do a lot within SQL. You can do a lot of powerful shifting and lifting of the data. You can reorganize it, restructure it, but it's very unshareable to non-SQL speakers, right? So people that don't know SQL, you're going to have a big gap there. So we'll go back over here. So now we're going to go into the combination of the two, which is what I just demonstrated a little bit. Is called DBT, Data Build Tool, and it's a combination of object-oriented programming and this, you know, gunky-looking SQL query. So how this works is, you saw that again, this is just the IDE of this data warehouse, right? This is the visual representation of what it is. But DBT sits as a transformation layer. So that's the T, so extract, transform, load. It's a transformation layer that sits on top of your data warehouse. And that can be anything. It can be SQL Server. It can be, you know, Amazon Redshift. It can be a BigQuery, or for us, it's Snowflake, and on and on. It can be as simple as MySQL even, or even MariaDB, or yeah, I think that's, you know, it also does PostgreSQL. But it does all the transformation, and it's a development framework that combines modular SQL with software engineering best practices to make transformation reliable, fast, and fun. So it's a combination of data analytics and software development, in essence. So it's an open source tool. That's what we use. They do have a cloud version of it that you can pay for, or your company can. And it uses Python, and specifically, it's a templating language called Jinja. And here's what it kind of looks like. This is a very basic representation of it, but you see these little things are templates. And what that is it's referencing another SQL query or model within the data build tool, basically. So it's within your Snowflake warehouse, or whatever warehouse your company uses. So it's a combination of obviously of Python and SQL. So the benefits are, it's easily updated. It's very modular. And what we do a lot too is we use continuous integration and continuous deployment through. We use Bitbucket as a company. So let's say if you have a lot of different people working on this, and you have a lot of different versions of it, you can track all that within a cloud development tool called Bitbucket or GitHub, and also has amazing documentation that I can demonstrate here in a minute. So let me go back here. So this is that same data set we looked at, right? We had all this data for Airbnb, the listings, the hosts, and the reviews. So over here, you can see everything. So what this is a documentation. It's basically a doc server of all of my data for that small project. So this is a tiny project. Here's what it all looks like. When I remove this, this is all of my data for that Airbnb project. Okay, I went ahead and loaded it. Here's a raw form of it. I landed it. You typically have a multi-stage. You have a staging area, and then you'll typically, for us, we have a little more complex. We have an intermediary layer, and then we have a mart layer, which has your facts and your dimensions. And then from there, you can split that up, and then you can create what this right here is a report or a dashboard. So I can focus on this. If I go into here, view the documentation, I can view this exposure, which points to something which I don't have in here. But let's say I built it out. It would take me right to where that dashboard is. So what's so good about this? Let's say Susan comes in and she says, "Oh man, we had a host a few years ago, and they have a lawsuit filed against them. I don't even know where to begin, but we got to build up this reporting tool that's going to track, everything that this person touched and who all her customers were and all their reviews." So she can come in here and do a query of all the queries that say, I don't know, listing. It'll pull up every single model, every single column that references that. So let's say she goes into the raw data set. Here's what it looks like within Jinja or Python. And then here's what it looks like when it compiles. So again, look, this is what it looks like in that data build tool. It looks somewhat wonky, but when it runs in your Snowflake or your data warehouse, it'll compile to something very simple like this, something that's easy to understand. Here's a little more complex scenario. This is the hosts that were cleaned. This is the Jinja version of it. And then once I run it in my warehouse, it looks just like this. It's kind of simple. This is, sorry, for those that aren't familiar, this is a CTE, a common table expression. It's basically like a subquery, and I'm just self-referencing that subquery to pull out these fields. That's a common practice within just SQL, and also very common in DBT. But you can see so much here. I can see what it depends on. I can see the code for it. I can see where it's referenced. I can see it within a lineage graph. So how does it relate? Okay, it comes from this source. This is the staging process. This is the dimension, and then downstream it goes right here. I can expand that out if I want. So you see that I have this highly interactive dashboard of all of my data that combines, again, object-oriented programming with structured query language that creates this easy to use tool. And it's also used by multiple people in other departments. Now, I know I went through that fairly quick, but I didn't know where everyone stood as far as their understanding of SQL and object-oriented programming. So I kind of left it open-ended to say, okay, we can branch. I've got the data sets pulled into a data warehouse. I've got it pulled into DBT. I could step through some scenarios. So I'll just leave it open to you as to what questions or what did I not explain very well? I'm sure there was a lot.
So we do have a question. Can you briefly explain what exactly the Snowflake tool is used for?
Okay, so Snowflake is a very, very popular data warehouse. It's probably one of the most widely used, I would say. You know, maybe you've heard of Azure, uh, like Azure SQL Server, or their warehouse version would be what is that? Is it Databricks? Is there analytics? Let's see. Let's just see common warehouses. So the top 6 are here, Snowflake being right here. This is Redshift, that's Amazon's version, AWS. This I believe is Synapse. Firebolt is a new one. But so it is a warehouse, basically. It is all of our data for our company. And that's what Snowflake is. It's like SQL Server kind of on steroids, and it's hosted. We host our data in Amazon, AWS. So our Snowflake instance resides on AWS hosting. And yeah, does that explain the question? Or were you wanting something more specific?
Yeah, David, let us know. Yep, that answered their question. Perfect, thank you. And the next question is, dbt is SQL API for a Python table manipulator?
It's not an API. All the API pools and stuff would be done probably between like whatever you're using. Like for us, the Snowflake is connecting to S3, and we'll use another tool in between called Prefect. A common tool is Airflow. Airflow and Prefect are very similar, and it'll pull from APIs, then it'll shift the data and load it into, for us, it loads it into Snowflake, and then we do all our transformation within Snowflake using dbt. So dbt is just it's a logic layer, and it's not an API, and it's basically it compiles code. So a good way to think of it is, here it is, and here's what it looks like. And yeah, I'll do this one here. This is Visual Studio Code. This is just an IDE. Okay, I'm using Data Build tool to run these models. Okay, so actually, let me switch over to the other one. So here I'm going to cancel out of this browser real quick, and I'm going to show you. So here's all of that stuff that you saw. Here's all they're called models. A model is another tool name for SQL. You see how this is saved? Do I need to zoom in more?
If you could, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll do that real quick. Sorry. 1 second. Okay, hopefully this will help. Cool. Okay, can y'all see that a little better?
Yes, looks good.
Notice that all of these files are a .SQL file. So they're all SQL queries, right? I've got them all stored here. It's not sitting in some like random, like, oh, I just wrote this query and I don't ever see that query again. I can literally see all of the queries that are ever used, and they're mostly very basic. Like here, it's basically a select star. That means select star means give me everything in that table. And here I've identified it for reference, right? So here's all your host data. This is at the very primitive. This is the raw data coming in. And so what dbt is it's taking this Jinja Python, and it's compiling it into code. So here's what it looks like when it's compiled within dbt. All it's doing is it's connecting to your Snowflake warehouse or your data warehouse, and then it's going to, let me just do a dbt run real quick so you can see it in action. I'm going to run it, and it's going to find all my models. I only have 8, which is very small, and it's going to basically, right now, it is connected to my Snowflake data warehouse, and it is running SQL queries, and it's moving data from one source location into another source location. It's restructuring it, it's joining it, it's performing some aggregations, and so there it just ran 8 models, which was 8 SQL queries. And then I can go into the compiled version of that. I'm going to go into run, and you can see what that looks like. So let's go dim. So here's the compiled version. Basically, so again, it's just connected to Snowflake, and it's ran this exact statement right here. It's saying replace this review, basically overwrite the review. A view is like a table, very similar in essence. It's not materialized. It's just kind of pointing to something else. And then it's doing a CTE, a common table expression here. And this is basically all it's doing. If you want to ignore the rest, the simplest thing is it's doing a select host ID. NVL is basically removing null values. And it's just pulling out all the columns from that one table, source hosts. Okay, and so then that writes, where that writes is, you can see where it writes to my warehouse. So right here, this right here is my schema. K gray is my schema. And it's in the database called dbt dev. And then dim listings cleanse, that's one of the models, or also one of the views that was written into it. So that looks like, and what that looks like within my warehouse, it comes out to look just like this, basically. I know this is very simple. It's probably too simplified, but that's it. It's written to my Snowflake warehouse. I can show you within the IDE if you prefer, of Snowflake instead of DataGrip. But that's it. I can look at the data if I want. I can preview it. That's the raw version, but it also goes into so here's the fact reviews table. So it just wrote out this as well. I'll do a preview on that. So it created this fact table. A fact table is basically the metrics. The dimension table is mostly like just information about. It's sort of like a breakdown of, for instance, for hosts, it's just the information you would want to know in regards to the host, but it's not going to show you any sales data or transactions, or it's just going to be a very basic descriptor filled. That's what dimensions do. So that, hopefully that kind of answered your question. So again, it's not an API. It's just a transformation tool that takes your Python Jinja, converts it to SQL, and it runs it in the data warehouse that you're connected to.
Thank you. Another question. So what part of the code is making the SQL object oriented?
It's this Jinja templating. So if I go into VS Code, that's a good question. Should have demonstrated that better for you guys. So if I go into, let's say, dim host cleansed. So this right here is a reference. So this is a modular, this is where it's modular. It's where I'm going in and I'm referencing another model, AKA SQL query. And it happens to be defined as SRC hosts. So what is SRC host? This is SRC host. I'm going to pull it over here. So I am, so basically I am querying another query. I'm pulling all this data from another query. And this right here is using, is defined, and I won't go, I mean, we can get pretty nitty gritty, but there's a YAML file for all of this stuff. So the sources are defined here. This YAML is, so this is source Airbnb hosts. Airbnb is the name of my database. I'm sorry, this is the name of this object. The schema is raw. And then here are the tables. So basically all this is doing, this is the very basic layer, the initial staging, is it's going to take the source data and it's just going to rewrite it. These are not great examples because you never do something this simplified. Like in reality, you're going to do a lot more complex stuff. You're going to cast the data types. You're going to join it. You're going to merge it. You're going to do all the stuff that you're not seeing here. But the Python and the object-oriented programming is performed here. It's taking this object, which is, and its references as host here, and it's throwing it in as a SQL query. So that's referencing this data set that's called raw host within raw, which is right here. Forgive me for scrolling so much. Let me get rid of that. It is right here. Raw host here. See that? is the same thing as this define here, and that's being pulled in right here. So that's, you know, it looks weird, but when it compiles, that's what creates this cool relationship. I'll just pull it up for our doc server. That's what creates this relationship like this. Boom, 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 boom. If you want me to show this again, it's died off because I killed it, but it looks like this. It's got a relationship here, source host, and then it goes into host clean, and that's where the modularity comes in. And now I can review this on a. I forgot to break this down. This is called a DAG, dynamic acyclic graph, and this is very common within, I guess, data warehousing and data engineering. You'll see this a lot, but you can basically, I can query this in a way, in a very primitive way. So this plus sign, it says anything after downstream, I want you to pull up. Anything before it, I'm going to put a plus sign there as well. But if I remove that, it takes it all away. But so you can kind of just query this. See, it's got a little select there. You can throw in tags. You could do a whole lot with this. You can make this a lot more advanced. You can tag, let's say you want data that's fresh data, old data, or data that's in the United Kingdom, or I'm trying to think of a good tag option. But you can just immediately pull up everything in reference to this host and anything that's been tagged for it. So that, hopefully that answered your question as far as where is the object-oriented programming being performed.
All right. Thank you. And then one more question. So actually a few more, but so input is SQL files, and then DBT is object-oriented programming with Python and Django, and then the output is going to be the database. I hope I'm reading that question right, Andrew.
Yeah, it's sort of complex and it's hard to explain, but basically the SQL files, yeah, they're stored within basically it's just like a file explorer file object, right? And then that's on my local machine, or I'll push it out to a database repo, and then the everything else is the transformation, actual machine, the engine itself that's doing all the transformation is all on your data warehouse. All of that, the legwork and the reprocessing is done on the warehouse. This right here is just Python code that's compiling and converting over to language that your data warehouse will understand. Hopefully that answered. Oh, I see the questions now.
Got it. And then what are some good links or references or documentations for each of the tools you're using?
Yeah, I'll gladly pass that on. So this, for IDEs, I use VS Code. It's open source. This is what you're looking at here on the right. This is Visual Studio Code, Microsoft's version, right? You could spin up your own version of Snowflake for free to try out some of this stuff, or you can do it on your local instance for SQL Server. I also use DataGrip. That's a really good tool because you can connect to all. So I've connected here to Snowflake, but I also I have a connection to SQL Server as well in the same instance, and I'm connected to both within one IDE, and I can query both, no problem. Like I can pull them up. I can pull up multiple, MySQL if I wanted, or PostgreSQL, or whatever the list. I could just stack them, boom. So this is a really good tool. It's not open source, unfortunately. The other tool is, so DBT is just, all it is an install. It's like a pip install DBT, if you know Python, and that'll get you going. If you have a certain connector, it's just pip install DBT Snowflake. Okay, and then now there's tutorials on how to get set up. You kind of have to create a virtual environment, and then you're setting up all your login credentials. You got to make sure, you know, whatever it is, it could be SQL Server, but you got to pass all that information in. What I can do is kind of point to some good So DBT itself has their own free documentation stuff, and they have tutorials on there. I'll link that to you guys. Here it is. So this will get you started. So you can do everything for free on that. Actually, you can create your own free account through DBT. It's the cloud-based. So there's a cloud-based version, and there's an open source version. So open source is just on your local machine, and it is that what I showed you, pip install DBT. The cloud version will actually host all of your data, and at least your schema, within their cloud. So you're going to pay them a fee, or you can do a free trial, right? I don't use that. It actually has some features that are nice, but they also, you can do scheduling. Like someone asked about APIs. You can throw in data from different like data sources. Like we have stuff coming in from Facebook, we have stuff coming in from Snapchat, and you can actually pull stuff using their. I'm pretty sure you can use their IDE to schedule stuff, to pull in, to refresh, all that. We do that on our own. We use Prefect and Airflow. So Prefect is our scheduling. That's Python based, and we use the cloud version of that. We actually pay for that. There is an open source version for that as well. So sorry, I know there's a lot of information there. I see another question. What? Oh, go ahead, Regina.
So what made you decide to choose Snowflake over other servers?
So for me, we use Snowflake for my company. I didn't get to choose that. It was already there. If I were to choose on my own, depending on how large the data is, if it's not large data, just use something local like PostgreSQL. It's open source, it's free, or SQL Server. You can use both of those. If you want to spend some money and want like a really heavy duty machine, I would actually go with Firebolt. Firebolt is supposed to be faster than Snowflake. It's basically the new and enhanced version of Snowflake. But again, you got to spend some money on it. So it just depends on how large your project is. But I mean, AWS has all their stuff. Redshift you can use. You can use Google Cloud. You can use BigQuery. Azure has their own Azure SQL Server or Azure Data Factory. But yeah,
Got it. Thank you. And then this question is from a while back, but how would you define a schema in your own words?
a schema. So a database can have multiple schemas, and a schema is here's what it looks like. So these are all databases. Boom, 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 boom. I'm going to open up one of these databases. Boom. That was a database. And now these are all the schemas inside of that database. Here's my schemas. Okay. And then you have tables. You can have views inside of that schema. From a high level, all schema is basically it's your own kind of defined. Within the schema, you define users, you define permissions, you define like access level, and then you have tables and views with inside of it. So it's sort of like you can have a database and you can have a schema for just a certain group of people or certain data sets or both. It's just kind of something that sits underneath a database. You can also do this at the database level. You can set permissions of who has access to the database, who can read from it, who can write into it. So read write is like, hey, like if you got Susan over here, Susan, back to our initial example, she's doing a read. This is a read query, select star from. Now, if she wanted to do a write, she wants to write into the data, she'd have to do an insert into, and then she would define what she wants to insert into, the values and whatnot into that. Well, I can't do that. This is a read-only instance here. But I could set that as a permission and say, hey, I want to be able to write into it and be able to update it on my own. So that's kind of a thing. You can also do a delete from, or you can do a truncate, which will basically just take all the data out of the database. You can drop a schema Um, so there's a lot to it without going in too far into the weeds, deep into the weeds. So I say that last question. The difference between the two would be a database is just a database can have multiple schemas, and you can have multiple databases as well. But schema is just kind of a hierarchically, it's just one subset under a database. Believe me, there's much better definitions out there, but in like common real world, you got a database and you can have multiple schemas within that database. For us, like at our company, we have multiple databases depending on what we're writing to. So we have a development. So databases will typically fall within certain environments. You have a development environment, a production environment, and then user acceptance testing for our company. It's going to be different for other companies. But and schemas will reside within those databases depending on what your use cases are. So hopefully that answered the question. Again, these are complex questions that you might, it'd be better to, honestly, the Tech Academy is going to do a much better. Rick's probably just like gagging, like, this is terrible, Kent. You don't remember what you learned, man. I'm not breaking it down in very good terms, but like Tech Academy is going to give you much better way to break it down. And to the question of DBT, is it a database integrator? It's not an integrator. It's just sort of complex. It's just a transformation tool that sits on top of Snowflakes. An integrator would be something that's like an API, like you're going to take data from one set and you're going to pull that, and you're going to do a pull request and pull into integrate into another system or another database, or you can use Python as an ETL pipeline that's going to integrate between one system into the other. There's no integration here. It's just a transformation logic that sits on top of the warehouse.
Yeah, I would say database schema is kind of the blueprint for the database. It kind of defines a structure. Now, Ken, I do have to say I am impressed. I think this presentation is really good, and what you've learned is just awesome. Can you kind of talk about what the training was like and what the learning curve was like when you went to work for Camelot? And did they have a lot of training for you, or how did that all work?
Yeah, it was a unique situation. I was actually just thrown into it. Our company had never used DBT, and they wanted me to onboard this tool. So I had to go and research it all myself. And I would partner up with my boss, who's the he's the head of data engineering, and he's got like 30 plus years of experience. He knows it really well. He doesn't know DBT. That was new to him. But so I was the guinea pig that kind of did all the research for this tool. And it was a lot of trial and error. It really wasn't until we started working as a whole coordinated effort as a team. There's about 6 of us, and we meet daily now. And we started to develop out this tool. So what I demoed was like, we only have like a third of all of our data. We have so much data out there, and we're just slowly migrating piece by piece, and we're transforming it. We're homogenizing it. And so yeah, it was a pretty tough onboarding process, I would say. I was just thrown into the deep end with no floaties, and but fortunately my company's been very patient, and they no problem, since it's new for the company. And so yeah, it was just a lot of tutorials and a lot of trial and error, and yeah, just kind of getting in there.
No, good on you. Looks like you brought a lot of value to the company.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a big challenge, I can say.
So we do have some more questions in the chat. So let me see so is DBT a database integrator?
So I think I answered that already. It's not an integrator. It's not an integration tool. It's a transformation logic tool. It's just on top of the warehouse. Integrators would be like APIs or pipeline tools that you can create. It's the T in ETL. It doesn't do so. Integrator, think of that. An integrator does like a loading. There's an extraction and a loading process, right? EL, extract, load, that integrates between systems. Give me an Excel file that you're extracting from a database, and you're loading it into another database. That's the E and the L. All DBT is the T, the transformation. It just sits on top of the databases where it's already been loaded, and it's just transforming it there.
Got it. And then we have another question about schema. So what is the advantage of creating a new schema versus a new database?
It depends on what you're wanting to do. Like it's sort of like a file folder structure, right? You're going to have a one database for let's say for instance for our company. Notice here you have a database just for Facebook. I'm sorry, this is a schema. We have a database just for DBT work, right? We have a database just for configurations. Within that database, we have all these different schemas. Schemas are kind of like, for us, we'll throw them away. Like, it's not a big deal. We'll drop a schema, we'll create a schema, we'll spin them up in the development environment, right? Because it's a development environment. We don't care. It's not being used in production. So when you want to create a new database, it's the difference between the two is like, depending on what your use case is it's for us, we develop a database, we create a database in regards to whether it's which environment it's in and what tool it's specifically or what purpose it's serving. So for here, again, we have data build tool here. We have our configurations up here. Again, we have CIs for continuous integration. We have finance stuff. We have operations. We have Rivery, which is a connector tool. That's like, I don't know if you've heard of Fivetran. Fivetran's right here. That's so I don't think I answered that very well, but basically it's just you got to define, it's kind of a file structure. You got to figure out what you're using it for, and what it's going to be used downstream from it.
Got it. And then there are a few more questions. Let's see if we can get to them. So the latest one, how would you advise someone to get started with a career in data engineering if you already have a BS in computer science and a few years of experience as a software dev?
Man, you got a good foundation. You'll be set. Is it Daniel? I think you'll do well. I mean, with that kind of background, you can get started. I mean, Tech Academy is going to have some great tools to get you started. Just a good path. And I guess from a business perspective, like you got the education side of it, right? You got to learn how to work with tools and build up projects. From a career standpoint, you gotta get started somewhere, and that goes back kind of to networking, I guess, depending on what you're doing. We're actually hiring. I think we're hiring someone that's similar to your background, and they don't have a lot of data engineering at all, but we know that they know software. And it sounds to me like you probably know software, right? You have a few years of experience in software dev, so you know software. So you just got to basically if you want to just start applying now. If you've got that kind of background, we just hired one who pretty much fits your description. But it'd be good to get some training on some basic tools, so you can come in, put that in as your description. DBT is huge. If you can get your hands on DBT and get that feather under your cap, you're going to be set. Yeah, that's a good resource that's been shared just now. I highly recommend following up with Tech Academy, or just kind of do some basic research out there as the tools. But I just share that the free stuff I shared you with, that's the DBT side of things. That's going to expose you to data warehousing, Python, obviously DBT. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you. And then going back to the presentation, can you describe what the executive dashboard would show?
Good question. I forget. So it is here. We can view the documentation on it. Sorry, I have to spin it back up. But it's going to show the data that is pulling from here. It's going to show this. Let me see this. So it's going to pull data from this dimension of listings with the host. The listings with the host is a combined of, is basically where he joined data from listings clean. He got the raw data, he cleaned it. Got the host data, he cleaned it. I say he. I pull this as a repo. This is a sample repo that I pulled down. Repo being repository, and I ran this code. I didn't actually go through and write all these models. So, and that right there is a combination of both. And then over here, this is just a side data set, which wasn't very big, but so all it's doing is you can see all the data where it's pulling from. It's kind of cool, right? So you can see this isn't working right now, but it would show you everything that it's pulling from. But all it really comes down to is the listings and the hosts, and then some of the reviews that are pulling in from the customers. So there you go. Now it's kind of updating finally. That's it. That if you want to look at it from a low level, it's just kind of this data that I was demonstrating earlier. So that kind of stuff here. It's your host price, the host person, what's the room type, where's the location and the name, and it's gonna have a I don't know what the dashboard look like, but yeah.
Got it. Thank you. And then one last question. So to clarify, what did you say that the transformation tool is transforming?
It's transforming the data basically within the SQL warehouse, and the transformation logic is going to be, see if I got anything more complex, but it's transforming all these fields basically. So one of them was removing null values. Typically it's going to be a lot more complex, but it's doing a joins. It's going to do casting. Casting would be like, hey, I want to cast this as a certain data type, updated as you do something cast as. Actually, don't know off the top of my head, but it has. See, it has a date field. So that's like a conversion there. There's a transformation occurring. Updated as a date field. I'm converting it to a date format. That kind of stuff. And then when you get more complex, you have a lot of joins that are. So here's a good example. Here's a case when. This is like an if-else scenario, right here. So that's the transformation that's occurring. It's saying when the minimum nights is 0, then set that equal to 1. Else, just pull in whatever that minimum night number is. So here, this is a cast right here. They casted it to a number type. I don't know why it formats it like that, but so he cast that number and he alias it as price. Aliases, he converted the column name to price. So.
No, good stuff, Kent. That's a really good presentation.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Enjoyed
really
seeing
appreciate
everyone.
you joining us. Yeah, great to have you. Also, if attendees have questions later on, would your LinkedIn be a good place to connect with you?
Yeah. Yeah, feel free to share that, or do you want me to share that?
Yes, I have it right here. I'll just put it in the chat. And also, we are recording this Tech Talk, so if you want to watch the recording back, it is going to be on our YouTube channel in our Tech Talk playlist, and here's a link for that. And next Friday, we have another Tech Talk, and we're actually going to have Chris Thompson do a talk on data structure and algorithms, and here's a link where you can RSVP for that event. But thank you so much, Ken, for joining us for that awesome presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks,
thank
Kent. And I'm glad things are really going well for you. And you are truly becoming a master. So that's awesome. You're doing great.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Great seeing you.
Yeah.
Yeah, have
Thanks.
a good weekend, Ken.
You too. Take care.
All right. See you, Ken. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. And we'll see you next Friday.
Awesome. Have a good one.